Nerd on the Podcast is proudly partnered with Apogee Electronics and Audeze headphones, leaders in the field of audio.
You've hit like everyone's soft spot on the show.
You sound like the ultimate specimen.
Oh, yeah.
The ultimate nerd life form.
What is, everyone? Welcome to Nerd on the Podcast. You didn't need, but you deserve, where all levels of nerd are welcome. All of them.
You are.
Every single one.
Every single one.
Today, right, Tom? Is that how I'm doing it? Today, we bring more audiophiles and nerdy folk to the party and talking about a particular aspect in video games. If you're familiar with the show, you've definitely, if not just recently, heard us talk about Audeze and how we swear by them, because we do. Well, in an RS episode style, we are bringing in Jaren and Grover from Audeze, and we're going to be talking about music and sound design in video games. But before we get too deep into it, I'm Corey.
I'm Tom.
I'm Caitlin.
Wow, this intro is so dark.
That got so slow.
Yeah.
No.
I'm Josh, and this episode is brought to you in part by the members of the Nerd On Nation that is powered by Patreon. As a member of the Nerd On Nation, you do get fun perks, like you get early access to these episodes. You get bonus episodes that nobody else hears. You get access to secret channels on our Discord server that are only accessed by you and other Nerd On Nation members. It's a fun time over there. They're secret. And also you get what we call the Nerd On Nudge on our other weekly show, the Nerd On Update, in which we answer your questions first. And we're really close to a goal over there. Once we reach 60 members of the Nerd On Nation, the Nerd On Nation gets to pick a topic of one of our episodes. Can you believe that? So
even My Hero Season 4.
They're going to pick La La Land.
Or Hot Rod.
Not that one, though.
Or Grease.
Not that one, though.
And a huge shout out to our partners in crime, Apogee and Audeze. Apogee have equipped us with their hype mic, the ultimate podcasting microphone. Refer to our live show for the reference. That was, it's an amazing microphone. You can use it across the board, Mac, PC, mobile devices. It's awesome. Check it out. We use it on all of our stuff, our episodes, our streams. Check it out. And this one is special. Shout out to Audeze because they are here with us today. We swear by them. We have since the beginning.
What's my saying, Josh?
The saying that is official that Audeze, you guys have accepted. If your ears were mouths, they taste like butter. They're so good. They're wonderful.
It's canonical.
Yeah. It's canonical.
Kerrygold butter.
And it would be, it would be like Kerrygolds or some good.
Yes. Oh my God. I used that this morning.
But yeah, you can also use our link, nerdon.tv/Audeze to support the show and shop at the same time. And if you use the promo code NERDON10! You can get 10% off your order. It's valid one use and not valid on promotional items. Promotional things. And it's valid on LCD ones, Mobius, and the LCD GX. So check that out. It's all on our partners page on our website. But I think that is a wonderful segue.
Segue?
I know it's segue, but we always say segue.
Segue.
Into...
It's from the Crusaders.
We are joined by Grover and Jaren from Audeze.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hello.
Really,
Willkommen, bienvenue. Welcome.
really excited to have you guys on the show and introduce our audience to you and you to our audience. Before we get too far into it, some introductions. Yeah?
Are in order.
Yeah, I think so. Let the people know who you are. Sound effect.
Thank you. My name's Grover. I'm from Audeze. I'm sort of the content monkey. All the video, social posts, photography stuff, all that kind of stuff that you guys see across our channels, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, is my wheelhouse. So
Nice.
Is that the official title? Content Monkey?
yes, content monkey.
Okay,
That's
cool,
the
cool,
official title.
There's a whole Zodiac thing.
Designated content monkey.
Yeah.
So yeah, my background is in music. I went to Oberlin Conservatory, studied music, creative writing.
Wow.
I'm a musician, artist. I've done acting. I've done, composing for film, games. That's kind of all my art stuff is what I like. So that's all kind of in my wheelhouse. I've been working in the hi-fi arena for several years now, as well as entertainment. And I'm super excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Super glad to have you, Jaren.
Yeah. So, Jaren, marketing director for Audeze. Background also in music. I went to Fullerton Junior College and then Cal State Long Beach for my bachelor's in jazz performance. And but composition's always been my preference. So, that's kind of been my creative outlet. It remains so to this day. So I do some composing for video games and stuff like that on the side. And yeah.
Nice.
That's so cool.
Your
That's
side
awesome.
hustle is
Yeah, my side hustle,
composing.
exactly.
That's awesome, both of you guys. How's everything been going? Like quarantine life for you guys?
Well, I've enjoyed working from home. So, for me, it wasn't too much of a transition, actually, because I've spent most of my life being a homebody anyway, right? So, getting used to doing work on the computer, it's just, I'm talking to people on Skype, which is a fairly normal thing for me anyway, because that's how I talk to most of my friends. So, at least from a work perspective, it's been a fairly smooth transition, I think.
Nice.
Nice.
I have worked from home for pretty much, I think I maybe had one or two jobs where I didn't work from home, but they were very small part-time things. So all my full-time employment has been remote work.
Wow.
So I was in LA doing remote work even before I worked for Audeze. So that was an interesting thing, job transition during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But, it's been good. It's been a little weird since I was a relative newbie to LA when things shut down. So I got a couple months of just going out every day, seeing cool stuff every night, and then I've been kind of quietly
Just cut
trying
off.
to. Yeah, I've been trying.
Welcome to LA.
Yeah, hello. Hi. It's not so bad though. It's definitely still been. I'm still meeting people, online and trying to, network as best I can and take drives or walks around places in a very COVID safe manner.
Yeah.
So it's still kind of all new. I'm anxious for things to open up to be able to see all the cool stuff that's here that I haven't gotten to see yet. But it's not so bad. I was definitely feeling some burnout at the end of last year. I was freelance when I moved to LA and I was just working crazy hours. So slightly less crazy hours now. And just doing little things to kind of get back on the bandwagon and return to making art in my free time because I haven't done that for a couple months. But yeah, just, cooking,
Always good.
Getting up in the morning, putting on real clothes, the basics. The basics.
Some sort of
Survival
structure.
It's
some sort of
time.
structure.
Yeah, it's time to return.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day on we did this like 6 feet apart park hangout, and all of a sudden we were just sitting there drinking coffee, and all of a sudden he goes, "Remember Hugs?" And I was like, "Oh no!"
Wow, that got dark really fast.
Bonnie and I will sometimes go, do you remember movie theaters? Do you remember going out
concept.
to, do you remember that?
Yeah.
Bring it up.
Like, whoa,
We're making it work, you guys. We're
Do
making
you
it work.
remember being broody in a diner, like barely filled with people at 2 a.m, eating chicken strips and thinking about life?
You mean my college
Oh, God.
experience?
I was going to say, do you do cast parties? Like,
Exactly.
I was like, I remember haircuts. That's for me.
Singing La Viva Em as a part of that, then yeah, I remember all of it.
But before we get into the marquee topic, I kind of want to bring it back to Jaren and Grover. It's very customary that our guests that we are so happy to have on our show turn the clocks back a little bit and kind of go into what was their baby seed that grew into this giant tree of nerdom. We all kind of had our start, whether it was a film, a movie, a video game, or even a piece of music. So what kind of got you started in? And Jaren,
We define nerddom here as anything you're passionate about. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a specific, like, what got you into comics,
Thing.
but whatever it is.
yeah, Jaren.
Man, well, that's a tough one. I think it was video games. I mean, video games was definitely the gateway drug for me into nerdom for sure. The first console was an NES that we had. Actually, no, that's a lie. Actually, we had an Atari. So we had an Atari.
Nice.
And my brother and I would play, and that was great. And then NES, and then the NES died in a flood actually because we didn't used to roll our controllers up. Right, and so our washing machine broke and flooded the whole first floor of the house. And we didn't know because my brother and I were fairly young, right? So we turned the NES on after that, and it just fried the thing. So then it was Sega.
Bill's
got a
character.
Sega
Bill's
Genesis, yeah. And then Sega CD, and then they released Sega Saturn, and I stopped being a Sega customer, I think.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and then that sort of transition. I think from there it was PlayStation, and PlayStation is really what did it because that's where the Final Fantasy, like 7, 8, 9. Those were the
Fantasy.
yeah.
Speaking
that
of
was the
Josh's
heyday
heart
for me.
right there.
Yeah,
My people.
Yeah. So yeah, after that, I mean, that's pretty much it. And in terms of music, it runs in the family. But as far as musical influences go, I think reality is that I wasn't exposed to a whole lot of music where I grew up. I mean, I was exposed to folk music and various things through my dad, my parents, and stuff like that. But in terms of mainstream pop, not really getting exposed to much. So a lot of the artistic influence just came from video game soundtracks, for better or for worse. So that's why my compositions tend to be as manic as they are, because I'm sitting here going to listen to old JRPG soundtracks now and just like, oh, there's just a lot of different chunks here. No wonder.
There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Grover?
It all started when I was a small child. I was born. I was unexpected. I'm kidding. Although I was not that far off.
I was gonna say I was.
I was unexpected. But
Oopsie babies.
yes. So not that far off from that event, actually. I think I was probably not more than 6 or 7 months old. And my dad had, I think it was like a hockey game he played on like a Dreamcast or something like that. And I, of course, saw him, and as a young child would crawl over and try and, tap the buttons on the controller because that's what I saw my, dad doing. And that was sort of the beginning of the end for me. I was less than a year old. I was, I think, 9 months old, and I sort of finally got the hang of like pressing the
How to
buttons. I didn't know
hit
what they
them?
did. So my dad would always get mad. He'd be like, he always gets the guy stuck in the corner, and I can't let him play games with me. He's too young to understand. My mom was like, you're an idiot. Just like unplug the controller and let him tap on it and let him kind of
That's what I let my little sister do. Right. Played the Aladdin game, and I was like, "You're a boo," and he just, "You're fine."
And so then, I got, fast forward a couple months, I got about old enough to figure out that the controller wasn't doing anything. So I would kind of try and plug it in. So he would take it and he'd plug it in halfway. And then I would be happily tapping along. And then by the time I was old enough to figure out, I was like maybe 2.5 or maybe 3, that the controller wasn't plugged in all the way. I was old enough to plug it in and finally figure out how to play the game and like not get stuck in the corner. Right. So, so I was like 2 or 3, and I was already bonding with my dad over video games.
Sweet.
And I remember distinctly a couple milestones. One was Final Fantasy VII, which I would always watch my dad play.
Josh is
And
just dying right now.
when
Welcome
I
to
got
Final
old
Fantasy VII
enough-
episode, y'all.
when I got old enough to play it myself, I would always be like, Dad, come read me the subtitles, because I couldn't read yet, right? And finally one day he was like, I'm kind of tired of reading you the subtitles. Like, why don't you figure out how to read for yourself? And I lost it. I threw a fit. It was awful.
Oh,
And
no.
I never cried as a kid, and I was like,
You got college at a
my-
very early age.
I
yourself.
had a meltdown. And then I went and I learned how to read. And so Final Fantasy VII was kind of why I learned
to read.
And after that, it was all over. I remember for me, one of the big things was the Spyro soundtrack. I don't know if you
my God,
remember, but
so
on PlayStation
good.
1, they had that game disc that had all the extras. And part of the, I can't remember what it's called, it was like Game Force or Game Sync or something like that. It was kind of an extras disc. And they had a little 6-minute, maybe max blurb about Stuart Copeland from The Police, and how he made the soundtracks for the original Spyro the Dragons. And if you watch it, it's kind of funny now, but because it was, I think, late 90s, and he's sitting with an old, like, Windows 95 machine, if that.
Yeah.
And he's got like a really early version of like Pro Tools or some MIDI composer, and he's got his little keyboard, and he's tapping in notes, and he's composing, the soundtrack to Spyro the Dragon.
Oh my God,
And
I
talking
love
about
this.
the process and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't really realize that was a huge influence, but like I've always loved those soundtracks. Those are very kind of foundational for me. And that was, that has always been a huge influence. And it also was something, it didn't just introduce me to game soundtracks and Spyro's music and Final Fantasy's music and all that sort of stuff. It also introduced me to the Police, right? And I was interested in, my dad was like, that's Stuart Copeland. I was like, who's Stuart Copeland? And he goes and he puts on Synchronicity 2, right? I was like, oh, this is super
Let me
groovy,
teach
right?
you
This
something,
is super
son.
cool. He was like, let me teach you something, youngster. So that was a way that I got into hi-fi, actually, because my dad was an audiophile and he had big Vandersteens and like dedicated speakers, And
Josh
so then
just
he showed me
passed
how to
out.
fiddle with the hi-fi system, right? So it was like video games and music and hi-fi and all this stuff all kind of was in the same world, and that was sort of how I got introduced to that. And then I'm also like a massive weeb because my mom is Asian,
Hell yeah.
and there was a ton of anime as I'm an only child at home in the early 2000s, and I have a slow but an
You've hit like
internet
everyone's
connection.
soft spot on
You
the show.
sound like
by
the
way.
ultimate
Like,
specimen.
Yeah.
The ultimate nerd life form.
We need to save him in a tube.
Like you hit Spyro, you hit Final Fantasy, you hit anime, you hit dad bonding time. Like this is you hit everyone's like that stuff.
Yeah. So that's that's me. I'm just like a bundle of perfect like early like 2008. I remember as being like a peak. That's like the year that it was crystallized as the year that I remember. Like the first year where you realize there's more world other than just you as a kid.
Some people
And
don't
for
know that
me,
still.
2000. That's true. For me, 2008 was I was like, oh whoa. There's like a big world out there. And it was because of things like YouTube and like early video games and anime on sketchy websites. I'm sorry. And, stuff like that. And that's like, those are my roots. Like when I'm feeling bad, I can go back and play those old games, or I can go back and watch like anime or that I love or play video games, or that's like my speed dial, happy zone, warm. That's my warm bath sauna space.
Aw.
What's your
Make
favorite
sure you roll
anime?
the controllers up then.
Yeah.
What's my favorite anime? Well, I don't know. That's a tough one.
There's a lot
what I've
of
been
anime.
watching. There's a lot of anime, and I've consumed an enormous amount of it.
There's a lot.
I will say, my what I've been currently watching is that one time I got reincarnated as a slime.
slime.
I knew it was gonna be a
Which
long
is
name one.
really, really wholesome. I was not expecting it to be wholesome. I thought it was going to be really stupid and goofy, but it's actually really kind of sweet in a
Yeah.
way.
There's
I've
a
also
trend to
been
that right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I've also been watching Overlord, which is kind of like a darker version of the same anime, but also is sort of strangely wholesome in certain ways.
Dark and wholesome.
And I've been on wholesome animes. I feel like COVID is like I can't watch anything dark right now.
So no Death Note?
So no Death Note. Yeah,
I
found
have been
this little-
rewatching Kenshin. It's literally just
Oh gosh,
comfy
or like
blanket.
Van Helsing or something like that. Yeah.
Nothing but redemption story.
Yeah.
I killed millions.
I did find this cute one shot of like 8 episodes called How to Keep a Mummy, which is like
Oh, the little
have
tiny
you seen? And he's
boy.
got like this. Yeah, it's so his dad always sends him like these horrible monsters from abroad because his dad's like this like mystical archaeologist. And one time he sends him this big coffin. He's like, "There's a mummy in it." And he's like, "Oh God, it's gonna eat me or suck my blood or something like that." And then it turns out to be this little like hamster
It's a little
mummy, and it's
chibi.
like really chibi, cute, and it's
So
just
we need a Funko of it.
Yeah,
it's- yeah. There
but
should be a Funko Pop of
maybe.
it.
No, conflicted.
But yeah, and then later on, went to music school and did lots of performance and write music for various things and do that and all sorts of things.
Nice.
Stuff and things and
Nice.
stuff.
The
I think,
rest,
I think that's really cool that you kind of like were able to find video game music and then kind of have it expand to the outside. Because I think, there's a divide sometimes where people kind of like, well, video games are one thing, and then they kind of don't see like kind of what you've experienced where, there are musicians who like get, hired to be on these video games, and then they kind of like again still tell wonderful storytelling, and that's what the kind of beauty with art is. Like it's transcendent. It doesn't have to stay within one particular medium.
yeah.
So like
I think I'm kind of to your point too. I don't want to jump the gun on this because I know we're going to talk about it more later. But for me, it's kind of flipped from how it was for most people because I grew up in a very international family, so I was exposed to a lot of music from around the world, not just like Western pop music wasn't really my home base. It wasn't actually something I really heard a lot of until like middle school or high school when it was in being played at like school functions and things like that. And so for me, like video game music and music from Asia or music from South America or other countries was like actually a lot of kind of stuff that I listened to, partially because just a diverse family background, and then also video game music was like the first thing that I kind of got hooked on, and then listen to maybe more typical mainstream music industry music.
Oh, wow.
And so for me, that equation was always like backwards. Like it was always very free, and then it was like, oh, there's like that sounds like this thing from this video game, and someone's like, no, that's salsa music. That's like that's the OG, right? So it's always kind of funny
Oh,
talking to
honey,
people because
you're so cute.
yeah. I'm like such a Gen Z like empty smooth brain.
Do it in
you know?
reverse.
I mean, I would say like for me, my first ever album like I ever bought with my own money was Mortal Kombat. And it was because
yeah.
it has like that high tempoed, like it sounds like it could be from a video game, but it was in a movie, and it was just like they could be both. They could be both.
I went to school with the guy. His daughter was one of my college friends, and her dad was the one who had done all the music for Mortal Kombat, and he was the toasty guy who did the toasty thing.
That's huge.
And he was really cool. And he's really nice. He offered me a job at what's the studio called in Chicago that does all the Mortal Kombat games?
NetherRealm?
NetherRealm, yeah. He's still at NetherRealm. He does a lot of pinball and slot machine soundtracks too, which I didn't realize. He's got it cornered. Like if you hear music on pinball machines, slot machines, anything like that, like
pinball machines.
He's done it.
Pinball machines.
He's like the dude, Dan Forden.
That's a big deal.
So nice. Dude.
So now that all the formality and ceremony has kind of been handled, thank you very much, Jaren and Grover, for those. We kind of want to go like a little bit round robin, a little bit of like what and how video game sound design and music have affected our experiences and gameplay, and how does it amplify the story, or how does it create an emotional impact on us? So who wants to go first? John?
I could.
I'll go.
I mean, I could. I mean,
Corey,
for
go.
me,
Corey, go.
Not all at once.
when the I just didn't want to step on anybody's toes. When the idea of soundtracks came up for me, I've talked about this since our first episode. Halo was one of the first games that really got me like taking gaming more seriously. Like I had a Super Nintendo and I played, I can talk about sound cues all day from Nintendo 64 and stuff like that. But when it came to soundtracks, Halo was like one of the first ones that stood out to me as something greater than, almost greater than the game itself. It's this thing that tells you how you should be feeling at any specific moment. That's when I started to understand what that was. I was like, oh, I see. And they got this amazing fight soundtrack where the guitar was, I think it was Steve Vai.
It was Steve
from
Vai,
from like Whitesnake and stuff. And I think there's this wonderful clip you can watch of him kind of playing that theme for the first time, and it just opens up the whole game to something completely different. And I remember playing that. I was 11 or 12 when that game came out, and just being like, what is this? This is amazing. And my buddies and I would like much like any other CD. Like you mentioned, your first CD, Tom, was Linkin Park. I mean, was that mine was Linkin Park, and then the Halo soundtrack. My Hybrid Theory was the first CD I ever bought, and then I bought the Halo soundtrack after that because I was like, I have to have this forever. And we would just put that on, no matter what game we were playing. We're like, we should put on the Halo soundtrack.
I do also like that in the Halo menu. At least for me, the most memorable is like in 2 or 3. And I was just like, this, like a game that's a first-person shooter and you're killing aliens and stuff like that. Like you would think it'd be like dun dun dun, the battle music, but it's like it kind of invites you to think like there's lore behind here. There's a world and thought behind it, other than just the feeling of like
it's very
pure
cinematic
adrenaline.
music.
Yeah.
Which for me, it's in a lot of games, but for me, that was the first time I had heard something that cinematic in a game. Nintendo has some great music as well, but it was another level for me with Halo.
It was serious too, right? It was like fusion music. It was kind of stuff that nobody had. It was a little unusual, like Gregorian chant, Enya, and like stuff like that. It was kind of like it was a little out at that point, and it was like people hadn't heard Gregorian chant or like guitars with orchestral stuff in video games at that point. It was very artistic. And I think most people thought, video games at that point were like bleep bloop 8-bit, like trivial.
Yeah.
And Halo was not trivial. There's nothing trivial about Halo when it came out.
I'm living for the terminology you're bringing in. I'm living for this.
Well, like because like you could go back, like Pokemon Red, like I can still sing every single town from that. Yeah.
Bum bum.
Or the the dun dun. Dun, dun, Lavender Town. But like, it was just this, it was exactly like you said, it was this fusion of like hearing the orchestra come in and then all of a sudden this electric guitar solo comes in over it. And you're like, I didn't know you could do that.
That was a mind-blowing moment. I remember as well.
Yeah.
People skipped school. Like I was in elementary school and like middle school when those games came out, and people, I remember it was like, oh, Halo 3 came out, and I was in like 6th grade or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was like,
My back hurts.
why is
I
half
for
the
sure skipped
class
school for
gone?
Halo 2 and Halo 3.
Yeah.
You were Okoye from Black Panther, just without question. I will skip school.
Yeah,
Exactly.
no doubt.
Caitlin, Josh?
Dang. I go.
Okay.
I go. So for me, it was less of, because I was very into movie soundtracks. But for me, when I think of video game and sound design, I think of like specific things like the choreo, Mario coin like sound. Things like when you
the sonic
walk into one of the levels where the camera moves, or you'd like walk into Bowser's castle and you get that
Yeah.
yeah, like you know exactly what you're in for at every moment. And there's so many of those satisfying
Thematic.
thematic moments in just a tiny soundbite that puts you in a frame of mind of what you're about to expect. And I gotta, as much as they like freak me the heck out, scary games, y'all.
So good.
So good.
Blah, blah, blah.
But like you hear a single like drip in the background.
Oh, yeah.
They're very specific when they do put in sound.
The music
like,
cues in that are super important. I mean,
everything about
one
it.
that comes to mind is Alien Isolation
No.
with their sound cues. I think it's the monitor. It's terrifying. 'Cause you're just like, it's here. It's here.
Yeah, and I love how in a single soundbite you can get a whole feeling. Like the Lavender Town, you've got 3 notes or 4 notes, and you know like the year it is, your feeling about when you're playing it, what you're about to face if you're there. Like so much thought goes into that stuff, and I feel like it's almost gets looked over, or it's just not talked about as often. But it's such a big part of the whole experience. So that's kind of my 2 cents is the mole on the back of the neck. It's the mole on the back of the neck.
She likes to hype
The details. Yep.
I want to hear from our guest, Grover or Jaren.
Yeah.
Jaren, do you want to take this one?
Sure. It's hard to know where to start with it, really. I mean, my opinion on soundtracks is frankly that they're really just as important as any other factor in terms of establishing a setting, or whatever it happens to be, whether it's designed to cue you into some specific function in the game that you're supposed to be mindful of, or just to establish that setting and that sort of thing. And as Caitlin was saying, for me, music always carries some sort of imprint with it, right? Like I always, I'll listen to an album in a certain place in my life, and then for the rest of my life, if I ever listen to that album again, it has that same kind of feeling to it, and I can remember where I was or what was going on at that time. And it's the same thing for video game soundtracks. I think this is one of the most unique ones I think that still stands out for me is Chrono Crosses. So I missed Chrono Trigger when it came out, so I played it much later and love it. It's a timeless game. But the Chrono Cross soundtrack, that is just sort of solidified in my mind. So anytime so here's a story.
Oh,
little anecdote. Yeah. So my wife and I, we got engaged in Mexico, in Tulum.
shout out to your wife.
Yes. She's also an audio engineer. She's currently staining a wooden coaster at her dad's house. But it's funny, but we went to this like Airbnb that we stayed at down there, and so private beach with it's like the one area beach that had the trash cleared off of it, and you look left or right, and it's just like mountain of plastic bottles. But that aside, the point here is, the house itself had like that kind of white, almost sandstone looking sort of architecture and material and stuff that it used, and just the Chrono Cross soundtrack just instantly popped into my head. And it's just because that whole game, that whole sort of tropical setting that game had, for whatever reason, I think just the age I was when I played it must have been, but now that type of setting is just interlinked with that soundtrack for me. So even in Mexico, I even told my wife at the time, it's like, this is what it's making me think of. So, and sure enough, when it came time to write some music for the, one of my own projects, and in that type of setting, that was the first inspiration that I thought of. So again, for me, I think music just has such a critical role to play in storytelling, in world building, whatever, pick a function. And I agree, Caitlin, it's like, does it get talked about enough? I don't know. I mean, everybody has their own way of processing audio and their own importance that they assign to it. But whether you're cognizant of it or not, I think it affects everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like, Caitlin, the concept that you're talking about, that I know it from a post-production standpoint, is signature sounds. Signature
Yes.
sounds are like, it's like, for me, I'll go next just because this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
One of my main experiences with music and sound design within gaming, and it's already been mentioned, my go-to game, Final
Victory
Fantasy
sound.
VII. Final Fantasy
Yeah.
VII, the soundtrack to that is the first experience in my life where the soundtrack was like that immediate, like, when I could download music, it's one of the first things that I would download. Like, it was just like having that
LimeWire?
sound. Yeah, LimeWire.
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 Amp or whatever that thing
Redacted.
was.
Yeah.
Redacted.
So it was that soundtrack. I mean, like, the One Winged Angel, the boss music. Like, anytime I get into a boss fight on any game, it doesn't matter what genre, I think
just
that in
singing
my
that?
head of like, yeah, here we go.
You watched Advent Children, right?
Yeah.
Remember their
Jonathan.
ringtone on their Razr phone was the victory.
Was
Yeah.
the victory thing?
I was like, what a Easter! I was like, wow, they
Yeah.
really did that.
But I mean, from a sound design standpoint and like a signature standpoint, the menu sounds, the blink, blink.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, when I hear that, I'm like, that's Final Fantasy. That's like,
Yeah.
and I love that Final Fantasy, they tend to, it's almost like Easter eggs throughout the series where it's like, you hear it throughout the games where you're
It's like the VATS sound in Fallout.
yeah, yes.
Fallout 3, that VATS like. Bring.
No, you're
I'm in it.
totally right.
I love that
Josh.
we've all made essentially the same sound, but we know exactly what sound we're actually talking about.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Jaren?
No, I just, you're talking about all the Easter eggs in the Final Fantasy. I mean, they own the IP, right? So it's one of the great things about playing. Like, I play Final Fantasy 14 still, and that is loaded with Easter eggs, right?
too.
Josh
Loaded
just
with
started
them.
playing it.
Yeah, I just got to some. I'm getting caught up, right? I used to play it a lot and had a long hiatus, and I finally got to I forget what the area is called, but the Final Fantasy VIII world music started to play, and I just kind of lost it. And I told my wife, "Hey, check this out." She's like, "Why? I don't care." But I was so excited.
I didn't ask.
I didn't ask for this. No, my wife's the same way. I'll be like, this is so cool. And she's like, that's sweet. That's cool.
That's nice. I'm
It's
happy
really
for
nice
you.
that you have that for you.
Yeah. But the thing is, like
Well, you have
modern
something.
modern examples is when the thing about music just in general is that the creative gamut has expanded so much that music can now include sound design. So like one game that I think about in recent years is Days Gone. It's a post-apocalyptic zombie survival game. And that music, it really like we've talked about, accentuates the mood. Like you're running from a horde of zombies and they have this really intense music, but they also have creepy sound effects that are within the soundtrack that you're like, and it's just exacerbating the tenseness that you're already feeling. And it's so cool the way that, I mean, we talked about it like with the Lord of the Rings of like how the music establishes, like, you know where you're at, you know where you're supposed to, what you're supposed to feel. And but yeah, it's my crowning thing will always be Final Fantasy VII. It will always be
Jonathan.
that is on the greatest hits. My shelf of life is right there.
So, sorry.
Go ahead, Kelly.
A question I have for Grover and Jaren, since you both have done composing, is when you are composing for a video game, something like that, how do you decide what to do?
That's a big question. Everybody's gonna have a different answer to that.
Of
right?
course.
You just basically said, how do you compose?
Yeah, I mean, well, like,
No, but it's a valid question, right? Like I was in music school and they'd bring guest composers and we'd ask them that same question and they'd say the same thing. Like, well, it depends on what I want to do, right? Like some people will start with a melody, some people will start with a harmony, some people will have some sort of rhythmic motif in mind, or whatever it happens to be. There's some sort of inspiration, whether it's a musical aspect or whether it's something else entirely, right? Like it could be a visual thing. For me, and I'm a weird composer, right? Like I'm not a big into orchestra music, right? I don't, it's been a long time since I've written a score at all. But for me to start, at this point just start playing with sounds. That's a huge one for me. Is just sort of getting my sonic palette figured out.
Sonic palette, I like.
Yeah. So it depends. Sometimes it'll be like I like this bass synth a lot, and I'm gonna do something with that, and whatever. It might be a melody, it might be a bass line, it might be even just a groove. But having the sounds figured out, I think, is my first step, right? Because I need to know what world the track is going to live in, more so than it's like a specific melody or anything like that.
I would say, I find that there's generally two sort of broad processes that I see game composers kind of fit into. And this goes somewhat for movie composers, although movie composing is quite a bit different than game composing, because in game composing, you have basically a chunk of music. And it used to be, they said, we only have this much disk space for this.
Right.
Right.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Which was kind of it was like you get 2 minutes and it can't be more than a certain number of instruments and all that kind of stuff. Nowadays, generally, it's like, all right, we have this much space. We want a 5-minute loop or a 10-minute loop or whatever it is, right? But it's got to be a loop. It's got to be something that can play over and over again. And you can do some things to transform, right? You can transform it. You can assign music to different things and things like that if the game designer wants to work with you to do that. But it's much more integrated, and yet it's also very, it's got to be something that you can hear over and over again. It's got to be very repetitive in a way that doesn't get boring. Film music will say, all right, we need basically 30 minutes of music, and it has to hit all these sync points. So you write a suite, and then you break up the suite, and you stretch it to fit all the different parts of the movie. And so with film music, it's a little bit less custom usually. Like most film scorers are not writing music when they write music for a film. They don't start by writing music for every scene. They start by writing like 10 themes, and then they break up those themes and fit them into chunks that say, all right, we need a drum hit when the hero rolls off the train or whatever, or punches an enemy, right? That's a thing that has to happen. In video games, there's a bit more freedom. And so what I generally see is either people playing with sounds, just playing around just to see what fits. And then I also see, and this is something that I tend to do, is playing the game and then playing your chosen instrument and kind of getting a feel for how that expresses it. I'm a really experienced keyboardist. Like that's my main instrument is keyboard and vocals. And so I will sit down and I'll play the game a bunch and just see how I feel, like, with no sound, see how I feel. Maybe I'll put on music that I like in the background, see what fits, like what's a sonic texture that fits, and think about the movement of the game. So if I'm playing, some kind of, like say I'm playing my keyboard, and with, modern music production, right, you can load up any kind of instrument or synthesizer or anything. So I might load up a patch that I think kind of fits the texture of the game. With the Spyro soundtracks, I don't know if any of you are familiar with them, but
Kalen is the professor.
Right. They're really groovy. And one of the things that I noticed when I was watching, I go back and watch that Stuart Copeland video a ton because I learned so much from it. Spyro has this, in the intro, he like leaps kind of in this wavy way, right? And that bass line that Stuart Copeland came up with, ba-doom, ga-doom, right? And then he's like, ga-doom, junk, ka-doom, right? It's this groove that goes with the groove of how Spyro moves. Like it fits the movement of the main character. It makes you kind of feel like he's moving more dynamically than, the 16-bit pixel monster actually looks like he is, right? And so I look for that a lot in games. Like there's many different things that you can do, right? Like, obviously there's leitmotifs like in Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, right? Where you have a character come on screen and they have a theme, and that theme needs to play and it needs to embody the character. That's kind of, what that does, right? There's elements where like it needs to set an atmosphere, right? Like Journey, the music in Journey does an amazing job of setting this really expansive, or Halo, this really expansive open atmosphere that makes you feel like you're, in Halo it's thrilling and it's engaging and it's action. In Journey it's like relaxing and very tranquil and very like open, right? and it mirrors the openness of this big open desert space. So I'm always looking for that thing, right? Is the game, whatever the game's supposed to be, I'm trying to look for that
X factor.
sound, exactly right, that X factor that kind of mirrors what's going on. Or sometimes, like if you're familiar with Howard Shore's work on the David Cronenberg movies, what he did was not write music that cues to what's going on screen, but kind of tricks you. So it's like, here's an eerie theme, but there's nothing eerie going on screen, but then something eerie will happen later.
Yeah.
Right. And so the
It'll
music
prime you.
is priming you in certain ways. And sometimes
Planting
it
a
tricks
seed.
you.
Yeah.
It primes you for something that doesn't happen. Then you're like, oh, it didn't happen. And then the monster jumps out.
yeah, they
right?
do
and
that
so
with
you
the
get extra
Game of
like extra shock from that. So I'm always looking for that. What is the artistic intent of this game? Is it an action game? Is it a fantasy game? Is it about exploration? Is it about excitement? Is it a horror game? What is it? And what is that musical seed that everything can grow out from? So if I find that element that embodies Spyro, like that groovy bass riff that mirrors how Spyro moves, once I find that, everything else fits into place. I just have to stack stuff on top of that. So from that single seed, that single texture, whatever it is that's right, I just build everything out from there. Because Stuart Copeland, again, this was an inspiration for me, right? He builds the bass line. He's like, yeah, and the bass line kind of needs like a little something here to make it groove more, right? To scoop a little bit more. So now he's got a little guitar thing that emphasizes the upbeats, right? Then he needs this little bell thing that kind of
the bell thing, yep.
syncopated, like ding, ding,
I was just thinking about it.
ding, ding, right? It's this weird like ping-pongy bell thing that's going on, and that accentuates the bass line. It goes up and down more. It makes it, it makes those peaks and those dips deeper and higher, right? And so all of a sudden it puts more movement in it. And the game is all about movement. It's all about jumping and platforming and stuff like that, right? So I'm always looking for that seed that I can build the whole thing out. And if you layer things like that from a production standpoint, that's a great way to do video game music. And speaking to those old JRPG soundtracks, that's how they did it. They would start with a bass line or a riff, and they would put another riff, and they put another riff. And your ear can hear about 3 to 4 separate, distinct rhythms going on at the same time before it just hears it as this wall of crazy noise, which can be cool because some game soundtracks are cacophony and they feel it's like there's this world of complexity, and JRPGs have this grinding world of complexity, right? There's all this complexity going on and you want to feel like that. And so with video game soundtracks, I know a lot of composers who will build up like 40, 50, 60, 80, 100 layers, and I generally actually have 3 or 4. But I can get it to sound as complicated as something that has that many layers because I'm doing just distinct lines, and then I'll add in extra stuff later if I need to. But that's kind of how my process works. And it's fast, too, because you need to be fast.
Right.
Gotta go fast.
So much history.
Sonic.
Yeah, Sonic. And Sonic's a great example, right? Da-na, da-na, na-na, na. It's just one riff, and then there's just a little bit of extra stuff here and there, and that's it. All it is just one instrument, and that's the basis of the Sonic soundtrack, tells you everything you need to know. And I'm always looking to try and, what's the soul of the game? Get it in one riff, and then everything else is details. Once you've got that, and that draws you in, sucks you in musically and sonically into the game, everything else is gonna
until you get Crush 40, and then they just like bring in this rock, and you're like, this is different. But hey, this is Sonic now.
Exactly. So that's kind of my process. I'm very into like the philosophy of art and like
I could
lots of
not
different
tell that.
kinds of music and things like that. So,
But it's
sorry
awesome.
if that was a little abstract, but that's
you've got like a whole library of information in your head about it, which is awesome. Like it's almost like you're really nerdy about audio.
Full circle.
Full circle. I mean, it's in audio school, the teachers would always say that, the audio of something, whether it's a sound design, the audio landscape, soundscape is 50% of the experience. And it's amazing with modern gaming that I think it's really such like a blessing almost of like where we are now in technology and what we can experience, like in the digital green room. Corey was talking about, this is a accidental product placement or plug, but Corey was talking about using the Mobius and playing and gaming nowadays. And he was like, whoa, like the experience of gaming, because that is a thing now. Like games come in 5.1 now. And you're like, I'm sorry. What?
I don't know what I was doing before. Like that's how it feels. I was like, oh.
One of the
This
most
is,
fascinating experiences kind of demonstrating that is if you've played the Halo Master Chief Collection,
Yes.
That's the
press
only thing that Corey
one
plays.
button and it will switch between the old one and the new one, and it switches to the old sound design too, which is a totally
I gotta do
fascinating way to compare the two. I've been playing a little bit of it on some of our Audeze stream, and it's really cool because I have a controller, and all you have to do is press the select button
Yeah.
on the
Wow.
controller, and you can switch between the old one with the old sound design and old music.
I
and
didn't
the
know it
new one
changed the
with
audio,
new-
too.
It changes the audio too, and it changes the spatialization, so you can compare the two, and it's super cool.
I did. I
Corey's
played.
dying
I played some
inside right
Halo
now.
with the Mobius ones on. I felt like I was cheating almost because I could hear footsteps on multiplayer coming up behind me. And they're like, "Where's he coming from?" I was like, "Behind us, guys. We got to turn around." They're like, "How'd you know?" And I was like, "Oh my god, am I cheating? Is this cheating?"
Expanding
wonderful.
your
Yeah.
experience.
It's kind of like when you actually have really good audio quality coming in through your headphones. It's almost like pay to play a little bit. Like you just have that advantage because you can actually hear what they designed for you to hear.
to the point of the game. Yeah, it's built
Yeah.
in.
It's
meant to be
built
there.
in.
Yeah,
But
and I mean, I think that's the interesting thing, like just kind of thinking about video game and then just particularly in the sound department, like I think there's plenty of things that we can talk about that has like kind of again transcended through like meme culture, even like the Metal Gear Solid like alert has become like a thing.
Throws the box off. Brum.
Yeah, like you always hear like the Mario going down like a tunnel kind of thing that everyone kind of knows what that means.
And everybody kind of like they hear it. They hear about they read about it or something like that, and then they hear it. And
yeah,
then-
like finish
There was
him
that
in Mortal
rap
Kombat.
song 6 years ago that had the Wii Fit music or the Wii Plaza music.
that has been just the montage
And then it was
music.
like, yeah.
I
the
listened
montage
to
music.
remixes of that song like for hours. I'm not saying like 2 hours. I'm saying I'll get stuck for a week listening to every remix that exists of that
yeah.
song.
And that's the thing. That's something that so fascinates me about it, is like the music is very repetitive, but it's also something that you can listen to a million times and not get bored of,
Forever.
right? Like that's always fascinated me.
No, yeah, I really
Yeah.
like how you were saying like you kind of had like a quote unquote, I guess, a different experience than like, I guess, general and massive people of like video game music came first. And then you kind of like saw like more of like oh, okay, now I know what the mainstream is. Where
You know what though? That's not as uncommon as you would think.
That's actually
there's
what
been-
my
yeah.
experience is too.
Yeah, and so some of the some of the better jazz musicians. I mean, frankly, most of the people that I went to school with in the jazz department, I mean, a lot of them grew up playing games, right? So I know plenty of people whose primary artistic inspiration, whether they know it or not, is like Nobuo Uematsu. It's like it's the same soundtrack stuff. It's the same approach. So you'll notice that in like a lot of modern jazz composition. I feel like if you take a look at like Kneebody or Snarky Puppy or any of these people.
Yeah, I was gonna say Snarky Puppy or Kamasi Washington. His music sounds so inspired by like video game style composition to me.
Yeah, hard not to be, right? I mean, it's just I don't know. It's weird. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves too, right? Because
It's very riffy, right? It's like there's these really catchy riffs that form the core of everything, rather than like, oh, we've got this melody and here's all the chords that go with it and here's the structure. It's like, here's this riff and everything evolves from this riff. It's almost like minimalist music, like John Adams or like Steve Reich or something like that. Like I heard the first time I heard Steve Reich was in high school, and I was blown away. It was like the roof blasted out, and I was like, what on earth? This is like the first time I've heard music that my band director has like played for me in like a formal music training setting that like I feel like is like, it sounds totally like my home base of stuff. And I got really into minimalist music in college because of that. But it was like, it's incredibly repetitive, and yet it's all about these tiny little nuances. By being simple and repetitive, it draws you in to listen to the details of the sound more.
you hone into it, yeah. And
Which I think is part of why sound design works so well in video games, but that's another topic.
Yeah, no, I think, kind of thinking about like, I love the idea of, in film, Lars von Trier does the Dogma 99, I think that was called, I forget, but like, it's pretty much, you could only use like diegetic stuff, you could, shoot it as if it's realistic, there's no special effects, X, Y, and Z, but it's like that restriction kind of breeds creativity, and I think that's just kind of like almost the like, the cross to bear with like the original video games, where it was just like they only had a certain amount of memory.
Yeah, like 2 to 4 voices tops that they could play with, and they were limited to the sounds they could actually make on the chipsets.
But then it just kind of like it just like created this think tank, this pressure that were like beautiful and memorable things that like da-da-da-da-da-da, like from Zelda, just became a thing, and now like we have like these new Breath of the Wilds and all this stuff where they have now like an orchestral version of it where it's like, wow, that's the same sound, but now, you know, if I have something that supports in 5.1, 7.1, 3D audio, like
Same with those Pokemon remakes. It's all the same little notes, but you're like, all right, it's a whole band.
I hear how an evolution happens, or or like, oh, like to me the bike music is like something like amazing.
I also think what's interesting about those early video game soundtracks is that because they were limited by the textures and the number of voices that they could have, there's an incredible amount of complexity packed into them. Like the Mario theme, right? It's like incredibly chromatic. It's almost, they hit, there's 2 or 3 notes that they leave out, but they hit almost every note in the 12-note chromatic Western scale. And the harmony, if you hear, there's a video of the original composer of that playing it on piano, and the way he harmonizes it is like absurdly complicated. It's like the most chromatic thing of all time.
Because it's
and I think, because it's all 8-bit and there's nothing complicated about it, but he throws in so much rhythmic complexity and so much tonal complexity. And I think video game music has really been inspired by that to like branch out, do unconventional, do crazy things that aren't constrained by like guitars, drums, and whatever, or by orchestra and
because gaming is unlimited. Why?
Like,
I mean, the soundscape doesn't have to be either.
And well, that's one of the most liberating things I find about working in that medium specifically, right? Like I vastly prefer it to doing something that's more static, right? Like if you go to a movie or whatever it is, a TV show, something like that, if there's an expectation, like we want it to sound like this, and you have way less freedom because you're there to fulfill a specific function. But with video games, you just have so much more artistic freedom and the ability to blend different styles. And I think again, the origins having something to do with that. What's interesting to me is to think of like some of these big orchestral tracks, right? Like you think of the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack, and you think of it as an orchestral soundtrack, but really it was an electronic soundtrack, right? I mean, that's just how it was. And to see this evolution from these rudimentary, quote unquote, this base technology, and then to have that kind of expand outward into live instruments and all this sort of thing, it causes you to approach the compositional process in a way that's just entirely different than people would have been able to in the past. And, to your point, Tom, when you're talking about limitations being, fuel for creativity, that's 100%, right? I mean, if you give yourself unlimited options, then it's very easy to get stuck, right?
So there's also no end point, which I think is kind of interesting, right? The end point of film music for a long time was like big orchestral John Williams soundtrack. That's the highest thing that we
then there was Nickelback.
And
then there will be a hero will save us. But like
exactly
in that sense, like video games now also will have like artists and do like, here's the song, like I think of Life is Strange.
Like the Bond song.
Yeah, I was gonna say Life is Strange.
Life is Strange
will have amazing like Joey Gonzalez, or Jose Gonzalez soundtrack.
Yeah,
and, like Skyrim.
And
Skyrim,
but then you have the God of Wars and then the Skyrims. But then that doesn't mean that the expectation for video games and the level of enjoyment and impact in our memories is reserved for like either soundtrack or scores, like Jaren, you're talking about with film. That expectation's there. Like it could only be those two things. It better be a fire soundtrack or a fire score. Where like video games, you can have like the old school chip, tune and all that stuff. And you're like, oh, this is just as enjoyable.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite things to do is to blend that type of thing with the orchestral patches, right? Especially like the one of the people that I work with, because there's they want orchestral music, right? But my whole thing is working within the limitations of the tools that I have, right? And working with orchestral patches is a huge pain in the butt, especially on my iMac. So I try to limit it as much as possible. And just the fact that I can just incorporate like, let's say a chip tune, whatever, like palette, and then just transition that into a full orchestral section or whatever, like take like a drum and bass type of a thing or a techno track and then blend that in together with a giant orchestral thing. Like it's the most fun thing for me to do is just blend weird combinations of whether it's orchestration differences or whether it's just feel and genre differences all within a single track. Which again, I don't know what other medium allows you to do that in the way that gaming does.
Yeah, it creates like a new space.
Yeah, it creates a new space. Have you played Octodad?
Oh yeah,
I've watched a lot.
Yeah. The menu music for Octodad is one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. It's like this funky whistling tune.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Right, and then underneath it, there's this harpsichord, and slowly the harpsichord just falls apart and goes totally atonal, like, and it's like it mirrors the main character, like gangling around.
Like at first it's fine,
funny.
and then you just lose control.
Exactly right. And that to me was one of the coolest things. It was like this soundtrack went all the way out, like all the way crazy, like just went totally
And
bonkers.
it works.
And then it brought it back in, and it was like you couldn't. It's very intimate. It's like a harpsichord, whistling, and then a couple of background percussion, and that's it. But it's very intimate, and yet you can have something very intimate like that, and very like kooky and crazy. And if you heard that in a movie, it would be pretty jarring if it wasn't like a horror scene.
I don't think I'd like that.
Right, movies. Well, the thing about movies is they're not interactive.
David
They're not
Lynch.
directly interactive. And the direct interactivity of video games brings a level where like you feel like you're a little more in control of the situation. So you can do things which are sonically jarring to cue people, right? Instead of just using sonic jarring to scare people, right? Sonically jarring or sonically surprising moments can be used to prime people a little bit more without having them jump out of their seats, right?
Especially Caitlin.
And I think in that sense, like
Sorry, we'll be playing Kingdom Hearts on Paradise Island, the
Okay,
most beautiful,
come on.
cutesy music, and then all of a sudden, like, she'll fall and she'll be like scared the crap out of herself. But
I assume that everything is the worst possible scenario.
Yeah.
We have a notification on our Twitch stream that just goes bring when we get tips, and
and then a year goes past her.
it hurts her physically. It's just some people aren't ready for it.
I do want to bring up a cool jarring thing that I recently discovered. Corey might hate me for this, but Corey recently got me a Sea of Thieves game, and I've been playing it with other friends, and so that's why he hates me.
And not me.
Yes. But they're really good about sound cues of being like, here comes the Kraken, here comes the Megalodon,
the
here
game,
comes
yeah.
the Ghost. But you can also play music with your friends, and if you all like play the same instrument, they all
yeah.
harmonize. You all play different instruments, then you have a full band. But one thing that I discovered, which was now my favorite thing, is you can get drunk. And so if you drink and then play music, it goes.
Your instruments played poorly.
like
yeah.
guitar.
It's
failing
so
Guitar
good. I'm
Hero.
like, this is amazing. And so other people who aren't drunk in the game, they're like, "What's wrong with your plans?" Like, "Oh, I drank all the grog."
So that's another wonderful thing about the medium, right? It's a blessing and a curse, unfortunately, because writing adaptive scores is a little bit trickier than writing something that's static. But yeah, adaptive music is an expectation now, right? Because it's just
I was just gonna bring that up because like you'll be walking in a game, and then all of a sudden the music changes, like and the way that they've seemingly done it. If you wanted to. I'm sorry, I cut you off. I'm so
No,
rude.
you didn't cut me off. No, I was just excited that you said that. I thought of the FF7 remake. There are certain towns where you'll walk through and you'll just hear it's actually really, really cool. The same, I forget what the name of the town was. It was like I don't know, the place where I don't remember. The place where Tifa gets kidnapped. Tifa and Don, what's his name? What's that character's name?
Don
You have
Corneo.
to go undercover.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so that town, I'm pretty sure, and it'll be a single track. But if you go
Wall
like
City?
towards,
It's part of
yes,
Midgar,
I
isn't
think
it?
it's Wall City. I think it's because it's where you climb the wall. The wall's connected
Yeah.
to it. But anywho, it's a single track, but it changes. Orchestration changes an ensemble type, right? So it'll be a jazz track over in this corner if you're by the club, and then you go walk by some guy with a cowboy hat, and it's playing out of a small radio. That sounds like a country tune. That was, you're talking about, adaptive music and things that are object based and adjust based on where you are in the environment. That was a really stark example of that.
So
that I
much.
was super excited about.
The first game I remember doing that in a really obvious way, but like really subtle, but very like it was a big part of the game was Flower.
Oh yeah.
Because they had that really
six
interesting layered
axis.
soundtrack, and depending on how you would play the level, you would get different musical cues that would trigger in different orders. And that was it was the first game I remember like noticing it in, and it's done in a very smooth way. But yeah, the Wall City one was really cool.
I just looked it up. It's
Oblivion and
Walmart.
Skyrim.
Wall Market. There we go.
It's hilarious. Walmart.
Excuse me, you're looking for Wall City? We're Wall Market.
Yeah.
That's totally a Walmart joke, isn't it?
It's gotta be. It's gotta be.
Was Walmart around in the late 90s? I don't even remember.
They've been around since
Yeah.
the like
Oh,
70s,
yeah.
I think, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Forever.
Wally
But,
World.
Wally World. The what was it? Oh,
said
Oblivion and Skyrim. Yeah, Oblivion and Skyrim actually did that as well. They have adaptive soundtracks because there's a bed of yum dum, right, like the background bells, right? And they layer different things on top of that. And so when you get to like an inn, you'll hear the same inn music, but it's layered on top of the outdoor exploration music, and it's like it gently transitions. It's quite
nice.
cool actually. It's very subtle because it's such a sparse soundtrack. But I've played I've
Fable
put like
does that a little bit, too.
2,500 hours into Oblivion, so
Definitely
I
noticed.
a lot of things
Yeah.
about. Yeah,
I mean, another thing to kind of talk about too is the expansiveness of some things. Like Jaren brought up Final Fantasy 14, and that's a game that I'm currently getting into. And the man, just the catalog of music that can be included now, it's just like it's almost seemingly endless, because like with Final Fantasy 14, like Jaren said, there's references to old cues of like from older games that you're like, okay, so you have new stuff that was made for 14, and then you have kind of remasters or remakes of the older game tunes, and it's like the expansiveness of the catalog is endless too.
It's incredible, and it's more than that. Just too, they'll take like a bass line from a track from Final Fantasy VIII and incorporate that into a completely new track, right? So they'll have these little tiny Easter eggs.
That's
in, like, these
cool.
really minor ways, yeah. And it's funny. It'll be tied to other themes. Like the reason why because it was funny before I got to that world music area that I mentioned earlier. I was noticing it was like a bass line from Final Fantasy VIII. I was like, oh shoot, that's this song, and it didn't turn out to be that song. But of course, they're using all these Final Fantasy VIII cue
Elements, yeah.
references because of the Gunblade class, right? So
yeah,
there's an example where,
Gunbreaker.
right. So that's just an example, right? Like, okay, we're going to take this weapon that came from Final Fantasy VIII, and because that's the new, that's our whatever you want to call it, like banner class that we're talking about, then we're going to use that soundtrack to just sort of support that. And man, the nostalgia factor in that game that they're able to achieve, and the way that, gosh, the audio plays into that is absolutely crazy. And I just gonna nerd out for a minute on that game. I just feel like, man, it's one of the best crafted games I've ever seen. And as a returning player, I found it fascinating because it's like it's been years, right? And so going back as a casual player and just seeing how they've structured it to make that process so engaging and inviting for returning players, it's just, yeah.
Well, I mean, just to like a really side tangent on that, because we're talking about it, the amount of work that Square in general puts into their games, like with 14 specifically, it was a crap game when it came out.
Oh yeah.
And they were like, for Square's like, we cannot do that. So they took it down for a year, worked on it, and re-released it.
Whoa. Oh, wow.
So they're like, we cannot have a bad Final Fantasy game.
Shout out to Game of Thrones.
Well, yeah, and the fact that it remains subscription based is I mean, it's gets into the whole MMO
I know
conversation.
so many people who play that.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one thing just because I haven't talked about it enough at all. I talked about some music things, but the sound design, how it's it's different than music, but even though they still have, you interface it with in the same passageway through your headphones or hearing it. But like one game in particular that I felt was so like it, I think I had the Grover moment, the roof blew off of like sound design was, this is, I think, a controversial game actually, because I think a lot of people did not like it and then a lot of people loved it. And I was one of the people who loved it, Gone Home, because a lot of people felt they were sold a different game. And so I 100%
love that game.
get that.
Tom got me to play it.
But I really enjoyed it, and it's all first person. You're walking through, and you're kind of just figuring things out. And the font, the artwork, it makes you think it's a horror game. And they have these cues, like just the tension. You hear like this droning, like coming behind
and you hear this random like, hey,
whisper,
hey, hello,
yeah, you hear
whispers, but there's nobody there, and you're like,
but there are ways you can't progress unless you find the certain thing. And then as you get to the point where it's like, cool, I just unlocked this new place. Oh, great, it's an attic. And then you climb up the attic, and then it's like, and then you're like, if I leave, the music's just going to start back up once I'm there. And so like the way that they designed tension for you in this game, that I'm not going to say the spoiler, but it's there to subvert you. I thought was just like, wow. I played it. I think it took me like 3 hours, and I was like, oh wow,
it's a beautiful game.
Wow. Very surprised. Very, very surprised.
I'll also say, and Jaren, you might be able
to playing it.
You might be able to speak to this better than I can, Jaren. But in a lot of my experience has been that a lot of smaller games, by which I mean basically anything that's not a Ubisoft, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, like none of the big games,
Activision, whatever.
Yeah. A lot of the games that are not those massively, hugely funded games are actually, there's more overlap between what the sound designer and the composer does than you might expect. Especially for games that don't. Sometimes it's the same person. Sometimes the person doing the composing is the same person doing the sound design. So that's one reason why they're remarkably well integrated in a lot of games, especially games that have fairly low budgets, is because the person doing both is the same.
When the tools
Especially
for
now that
integrating that
THQ
sort of thing.
and a lot of the medium-sized studios are gone. There's not
Yeah.
teams like there used to be, except at the big studios.
What were you saying, Jaren? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying that the tools for integrating that sort of thing are I won't call them intuitive, but they're just so much more powerful than they used to be, right? So it's really not that hard to start integrating sound design and music and stuff like that. And if you're talking about implementation, you're generally going to have one person responsible for both implementing the music and the sound design both, right? Because you're going to have this giant, whether it's a Wise project or FMod, you're going to have this gigantic archive of things that you have to keep track of. And if you have multiple people in there doing that, you're going to have a hard time. Especially when you start integrating it from FMod into Unity or whatever your engine happens to be.
Yeah.
But sound design's a lot of fun though.
Yeah. Oh, it's really fun. Have you guys seen the video of them doing the Mortal Kombat sounds?
Yes.
Where they're, like, ripping apart peppers.
Yep.
With
Oh,
the
yeah.
really full
Oh god.
close-up shotgun mic to do all the death sounds.
Dude, so the
Makes
approach to sound design, right? Like what I think is super fascinating, Grover, like, because again, that video where I think opens your eyes to what it is. Like you think, okay, I have to make a fire sound or something, and you know that you can't just like light a fire and record that, right? So you have to start thinking about all of the different elements that make up a fire sound, right? Like, is there going to be a crackling sound? Is there going to be a whooshing sound? Right? There are all these different components that you need to layer, and so it's really fun to kind of think. Like I think we had to do like a explosion, or it was like a fire magic effect, and I had this like a Tupperware full of mixed nuts, and I like, wait a minute, and I turned it on its side and went I was like, oh, so there's mixed nuts in our fire sound now, all kinds of random stuff like that. So it's a blast.
And the interesting thing is, oftentimes, this is just a side note, the sound that like lighting a lighter under a microphone, it doesn't sound like lighting a lighter under a microphone. It sounds totally different. Like if you don't have the visual cue, and even if you do, it does not sound like what you would think it would sound like. And it's very
Getting all
interesting.
little details. Yeah.
You have to get an ear for texture. Some people have really good ear for pitch and harmony. Some people have really good ears for rhythm. There's also an ear for texture. I'm a nerd, so I'm interested in this kind of stuff. But like
you're
people
accepted.
who are really, I guess it is nerd on, right? People who are really talented at this have a good ear for texture. They can. It's kind of like old synthesizer guys, like can listen to a sound and they're like, oh yeah, it's like a square sine saw triple oscillator with a VCA that's doing this and blah. Like they can tell you all the settings for what it is and how to replicate it. And you put it in and you're like, what the heck? That's like actually what it is. But yeah, like listening to sound design, it's the same thing, right? It's like, oh, that's probably like someone tearing a pepper apart, or like you see that you need to make a sound of like someone swinging a sword and it sounding as if it's cutting through air, which swords don't actually really sound like that in real life, right? Unless you swing them very hard. And how do you make
You don't
that
swing
sound, right?
swords really hard?
Whooshing sound. Well, I do, but maybe some people don't. There's a lot of decapitated plants in my apartment.
I wanted to talk to that fact a little bit too, because I went to audio school and I grabbed this book because this is the Sound Effects Bible.
Sound Effects Bible.
But in the class that this came with, they talked about that. It's like a reverse engineering of where you can do it with music where you're like, oh, okay, I see that they did that, then they panned it. Oh, okay, they're kind of using an EQ here. But like with sound design, you can kind of listen to it, and like you mentioned the lighter. And shout out to a friend of the show, Jeff Nimoy. I worked on his film, and there's a moment in the film where he uses a Bic lighter and he lights a cigarette. And in sound design and Foley, I'll always try the actual thing, the actual like item, like, oh, I have a Bic lighter, I'm going to try this. It doesn't translate.
So you don't waste 4 hours and then come back and be like, I could have done this the whole time.
And it doesn't translate. So what I did was I grabbed one of those, those cameras that they make that
with the wheel and you have
disposables.
The old, like,
disposable
point and shoot.
cameras.
Yeah,
I just did a quick turn of that and it translated better. And I was like,
wow.
And so it's like you never know what it might be, where it's like, oh, okay, that's actually like brushing on a cymbal, or that's it's just flicking a glass or something like that, where it's like you just analyze it.
Crunching celery.
It's true. It's true. I always, whenever I have to do fires, like crackling fire sounds, I grab a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Every time.
Oh.
A cellophane's an old radio trick.
Yeah, cellophane is an old one as well, right? Yeah. There's tons of tricks, tons of cool tricks.
Before we kind of reach the end of the show, I kind of wanted to kind of round robin of maybe like a really quick, tiny list of like your favorites. Don't have to go in detail, just like
A tiny list, like a million?
Yeah, like
like
a million, your million favorites,
two.
like
Tiny
like
is relative.
2 to 3 of like your favorites that immediately jump to mind. Like I know with Corey, it's Halo's probably on there.
Yeah.
And Josh is Final
Are we
Fantasy.
talking about just sound design or music or what?
Just the soundscape of the game, soundtrack or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Halo is for sure probably top of my list. I mean, it's hard to, it's hard when you found the thing that kind of opened your world to it, and it's still a relevant franchise today. And there's still, we were playing through Halo 4 the other day, and I'm still just like, they still get it with the music and the sound design. Like this is still, they introduced an entire new set of weapons into Halo 4, and the design for those weapons, like I could tell you which one it was with my eyes closed, which is like really impressive thing to do. So Halo, and then like, I don't know, any old Nintendo 64 game, or I have a soft spot for, or like Tom knows this. I loved Gauntlet Dark Legacy. Like the soundtrack to that, and the sound effects and the catchphrases of all the different characters is just like burned into my psyche forever. Where it's like I'll hear someone say "batter up," and I immediately think of Dark Legacy because the gesture was just like "batter up" every time you would attack, and it had this like really crunchy dark soundtrack, and it felt like this kind of underdog type of game from the get-go, and it's just kind of, it's dark and it's gritty, and it's you're gonna save the world and you're swinging a giant axe around or casting magic spells. It's a really wonderful experience.
I'll go next. I'd probably say Pokemon. In all honesty, like I think Pokemon was like so big for me. Like gym battles, it's like, hey, does your mother know you're gone? Battle. It's like, oh my god, like how why would you ask me this question? I'm playing a game.
I've been out here catching bugs.
Yeah, and it's just, or like the sound of like poison, or your Pokemon about to die, and then they're about it. And you're like, this is so stressful. But
My shorts look weird. Let's battle.
and it's just like you're adopted. Your parents still love you. Let's battle.
Yeah, it's like kindergartners ask you like, their hat is too big.
Lads,
What?
lads, they're lads. In that game.
That and
Lads,
then
yes, lads.
actually Mario Kart 64, I think was big for me. When you have that golden mushroom, and then you're using Toad because they're the light character, and just it's just like just jamming that button. You're just like, oh my god, this is so annoying. But like, there's iconic things like getting the box, and then shooting like the blue shell. Like those are all very iconic things for me. But that's mine. Pass the mic. Who wants to take?
I'll go. Obviously, I've already mentioned Final Fantasy VII, but another big one is The Last of Us. The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. The soundtrack is chef's kiss. Like the composer Gustavo. Like, I'm a sucker for acoustic guitar used with like orchestra. I'm just like a sucker for it, and like it's a beautiful soundtrack that just, the story is already great, but you add the soundtrack to it, and it's just a full experience. And Days Gone, like I mentioned, it was just like it was another one that it was a couple of years ago, so it had a slew of different kinds of stuff, from orchestra to even kind of folk sounding stuff and all that kind of stuff. But those are mine. Kaylin?
So we already kind of talked about Journey and Spyro and brought up Skyrim. So one that kind of sticks out in my mind is Slime Rancher. All of the slimes have a very individual sound. Their plorts have an individual sound. They're little poops that you collect and sell for money. They're called plorts.
You're a poop merchant.
You're a plort merchant. Poopsmith. And then like when you go through different areas, the music changes and just all of it. And it doesn't get annoying because there was also like 20 of them in a little box making little slime sounds. and somehow I don't hate the sound of it, even if you have like the little cat slimes and they're like meow, and there's like 30 of them, and you still don't hate them. Somehow,
Okay.
the sound design is so good that you don't hate them.
Because you're a poop monger.
Yeah. Well,
You're a
I knew a
poop
lady who had 30 cats, and she liked all of them too.
That makes sense.
You're a caca connoisseur. Sorry.
Wow, this is gonna go down a dark road real quick.
Next.
What about you,
Grover?
Jared?
Jared?
Yeah. I mean, it's short and sweet. I think I'd have to go with composer. It's a little hard for me to pick the specific game because there's so many. But Yoko
Please.
Kanno's by far has been one of my primary inspirations, pretty much my whole life, because she does everything, and she does everything perfectly. It's pretty insane. It doesn't really matter what genre it is. And then, of course, Nobuo Uematsu from, Final Fantasy fame.
I like how you just went, I mean, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't
You
require
know.
a lot of explanation. And then I think Yasunori Mitsuda as well, the Chrono Cross guy, Xenogears, all that stuff. I mean, it's weird to me that all of my primary musical influences, if I really think about it, are these Japanese composers. But like, what can I say? That was what I was watching, and that's the content that I was consuming, right? Like the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack. My God, like that was the soundtrack for like every jazz kid in high school or middle school. Like, oh, let's play Tank.
Tell me, since you talk about Cowboy Bebop, any Samurai Champloo?
Oh yeah, so yeah, Samurai Champloo and Cowboy Bebop were kind of my two. The first anime that I
They're
purchased
intertwined.
DVDs for.
Any
Yeah.
Nujabes?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Nujabes. Oh yeah.
yeah.
We love Nujabes. Actually, my wife is the one who introduced me to him.
was
No,
listening
yeah,
to
man,
Lovesick
and
the other
the
day.
lo-fi thing is incredible.
Rory
I
and
love that
Dance
stuff.
is my favorite song of all time. It's
Tom and I
just
used to work in a
Lovesick Part
warehouse
3.
together, and that's all we would have through playing through the warehouse and New Javis the whole day, pretty much. Either that or like lo-fi remixes
You're welcome.
of Studio Ghibli films.
you're welcome.
Yeah.
What about you,
Grover?
Grover?
I thought of so many while I was sitting here, being like, which ones should I talk about? I think for me, Flower was a big soundtrack because it's minimalist music, and the way it was done and the way it was integrated, right? It was like just really got me.
Yeah.
And I'm a pianist, and I just love the third level, I think, where it's just very, that was just a soundtrack that really resonated with me.
And it
I
makes you
think,
focus on it too.
It does. It's very like it suits what's going on in the level. It's very the final level where you're purifying the city. Very
Purifying
It's
the city
into-
sounds like a really bad thing to do.
But you're a wind. It's okay.
flower.
You can't-
Yeah, you're like a flower dragon.
Don't spoil it.
You're
Anyways,
I
would
went
have
there
to
too,
say-
Jared.
Everybody
For
here is
me-
allergic to pollen.
Amazing. For me, two actually stand out. All the ones, I mean, Spyro and all that other stuff we've talked about, Oblivion, all that. I put 2,600 hours into Oblivion, so that music is
Oh my.
pretty
So you liked
in my brain. Yeah, I actually wrote some of the Elder Scrolls wiki articles about like
Whoa.
bugs and stuff like that.
I didn't know this
when I was
about
awesome.
you.
young. I was in there.
We're
That's
all
on there every
learning
day.
something today.
Oblivion.
actually,
Two that really come to me are the Sly Cooper series, because sound was such a big part of setting the mood, and you would gain new skills, and it would give you
mission.
sound cues when you were fighting bosses that told you that you had to use certain skills to defeat them, and to solve puzzles and things like that. And the atmosphere. It wasn't a soundtrack where I necessarily remember specific things about it, but it was a soundtrack where I remember the impact of like being in the environment so much. And I really love that from like a soundtrack being invisible, but really, really enhancing what was going on. That was cool to me. Because before that, I had played a lot of games that had really catchy, memorable soundtracks. But that game, I was like, I don't remember the soundtrack, but I remember the soundtrack being awesome. And that's
Right.
that took my musical understanding of that to like a different level when I was a kid. I was like, oh, that's like audio can be invisible as well. And then another one was Sonic Adventure Battle 2.
Yes, Crush
Yes.
40! Live and learn!
Yeah, the Escape from the City, of course.
Yeah.
Which is
Rolling
iconic.
around it. Yeah.
And then the Chow Garden music and
Chow.
just
Throwing those
the
guys against
music
the wall
from
all the
those-
time.
Those environments was so cool, so memorable. I love Green Hill Zone. It's one of my favorites.
Green Hill Zone is
of
so
time.
good.
I can listen to remixes of it all the time.
Have you heard? I don't know if this might be like it's kind of old by the time I'm mentioning it. The Daystorm rap of it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was like, when I heard, it, I was like, oh, this is. I I like
That was
this.
such a cool Wild West, like that. 2008 to 2010, or it was like 2006 to 2012, 2014 was like such a Wild West of the internet and internet culture and game culture
before
and
copyright was
indie stuff.
hella hard.
Before big corporations took over the internet. And
I did like
monetized everything.
a Halloween short in high school trying to get my filmmaking craft up, and I ended up taking the score from Silent Hill and then putting it into the Halloween thing. And I was like, this could be cool. And then again, that was the Wild Wild West. So all the rules were there. You're just like, I'll just take all it and then put it and then make a thing.
Man,
you could
this
do
whole time, and I completely forgot about the Silent Hill.
Silent Hill.
Yeah.
My God. How could I?
So
Talk
good.
about a creepy soundtrack and incredible sound design that just makes you feel uncomfortable for hours. Yeah.
But it's
That guy.
but it's
And
beautiful
industrial.
in a way.
Oh yeah, yeah. That haunting kind of
The
pretty
strings.
mixed with weird industrial. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I should have listed that because that's incredible.
I have failed
also noticed-
myself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick, I have always wanted to ask you guys this.
Ooh.
What is the origin of the company name Audeze? What does it mean?
Yes, it is. It's a play on words. So the story goes that in the garage where the company started, there was a poster of 2001: A Space Odyssey hanging on the wall, and we're not notoriously great at coming up with names. So I think they just sort of looked at that and were like, "Well, we need a name." And this poster's here, so they combined the word audio and the word Odyssey, and then threw a Z in there for fun, and then we got Odyssey.
Cool.
Yeah.
Perfection.
That story's
love it.
even better.
Perfection.
That is perfection.
Makes me so happy.
Grover and Jaren, thank you so much for joining us.
This was
Thank you,
fun.
guys.
This is a lot of
This is
fun.
great.
Yeah. Thank you
I
for having
learned
us.
so much.
So much information. Just
Can't wait to say
everywhere.
Sonic Palette a lot now.
There you
Yeah,
go.
me too.
You're
Use the
welcome.
word
Thanks for that.
textural granularity.
Yes.
I feel like
Can you
that
just send me
Eric
these? These are like
Wareheim-
hot words, and I'm here for it.
I feel like
gonna
an
use
Eric
them
Wareheim
incorrectly.
gif where he's just all the fireworks going off in my brain.
Those are like $5 words.
Yeah.
So what would you like our audience to check out? Like, I know that you guys have some new products. Like,
The stage is yours.
yes.
Well, Penrose, Mobius, really, I think are the two. Those are the two. I really just
The
which
big
one you
O's.
choose.
We're all like
Yeah.
scrambling because we're like, look,
Yeah.
it's right here. We
I
have
mean,
it.
just for gaming, it's really hard to beat them.
That's what I use on streams.
Da-da-da.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just really, our entire catalog is full of wonderful, wonderful products. But I think the most accessible ones and relevant to gaming and all that sort of thing would be those two for sure. And if you ever want to hear surround sound in a headphone,
Oh
of
my
course, the
gosh.
LCD one, which all these guys are wearing as well. It's another huge one. Also super accessible, folds up, fits in that little thing. So that's fantastic.
I mix all of the video versions.
There you
I edit everything with these.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, that's a big one too. I think I wish more people would believe and know that the LCD ones are fantastic for that
Oh my
purpose
God.
because they really, really are, especially at that price point. It's like, what?
yeah.
There's nothing else that you
I
can
use
think
these
of.
for working on Netflix projects too.
Wow.
Yeah, we actually have Pixel Logic does a lot of QCing for surround mixes for Netflix on Mobius
I have-
Mobius, yeah.
headphones.
I have mixed trailers, 5.1 trailers on the Mobius.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Honestly, as an all-around headphone, I have to say, as someone who's an audio professional, audiophile, gamer, does also have to work on 5.1. Like, I have a great studio setup, but I don't have space or money for a surround setup in my studio. So the Mobius is a godsend because I can work on surround and ambisonic stuff and know that I'm,
Yeah.
That
hearing
it's
what I'm
accurate.
supposed to be hearing. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And low distortion and good frequency response.
And you guys also,
just
I mean,
pluses.
like you mentioned earlier, you stream on Twitch.
We do. So twitch.tv/Audeze LLC. We're also on YouTube, youtube.com/AudezeHQ. Instagram is probably our most active platform, but we are also on Twitter and Facebook. We'll let you know when we go live. We're typically live 1 p.m. Pacific time Wednesdays, and that's usually a gaming related stream with Q&A. And then Fridays 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, also live, usually doing production and music or audio production related streams.
Awesome.
on Fridays.
And then check out the newsletter too. If you just hop on the home page of the website and scroll down, that's a good one too, especially if you ever want to get a sale, because our stuff tends to sell out basically right after we announce it.
Immediately.
So pretty much.
It's like so immediate.
Yeah, and it's always from the newsletter too. So if you really want to be on top of stuff, the newsletter is the place to go.
Nice.
Awesome.
Thank you
Everybody
so
at
much.
home,
Yeah.
thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Reach out to us, whether it's social media. Nerd on TV is our handle on everything. Reach out to us. Tell us your experience with audio, the soundtrack, sound design, anything with gaming. Reach out to us. Join that Discord, nerdon.tv/Discord. There is a gaming channel in there. There's even a music channel in there. Let's talk. Let's continue the conversation. And like I said at the top, consider joining that Nerd On Nation. It does allow us to grow and be the best that we can be, upgrade our quality for you. We dig it. Stop by, rate and review us wherever you listen. Subscribe, share us with your friends, your family.
You guys.
Yeah, Kaylin, what's up?
When like you're playing a Final Fantasy game and you go up against a boss and it's like a big old boy and you're
Yeah, we
like, oh
got
my
you.
God, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And then you one shot it and the victory music plays and you're sitting there holding your controller like, I didn't know that I had level grinded enough for this experience.
I did.
That's what getting a review is like for us. Like that, hearing the victory music
Yeah.
and just like living in
We get it
that,
and we
like,
hear
grateful shock. Exactly. So that's what
swing
will
our
happen
sword.
when we read your reviews.
Yeah.
Kaylin, that was beautiful,
yes.
Kaylin. That was
Thank you.
That was
Thank you,
nice.
Kaylin.
Nice.
From the heart.
Just like
Thank
that. But thank you so much for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. But that has been this week's episode. You know the drill. As always, nerd on.
Nerd on.
Nerd on.
Ending broadcast.